and researchers, there are two different kinds of happiness. And one is the happiness that we derive from sensual pleasures, the happiness we derive from things like shopping, for example, from food, from money, and even from awards and achievements. So all those things that give us some kind of material pleasure, or the pleasure that we receive from succeeding in some small way gives us a boost. Then the other form of happiness that we look at, so the first form of happiness is something we call hedonic happiness, and the other form is called eudaimonic happiness, and that is happiness that's derived from things like pleasure, from things like meaning, from things like purpose, service, altruism, something beyond just your own self. And if you look at the research, the first type of pleasure, which is basically, you can think of it as a sex, drugs, and rock and roll pleasure, it's so fun, right? But it has a very momentary, short-lived life. It comes and goes very quickly, and that leads us to want more. But if we look at eudaimonic happiness, that's actually the source of much more long-lasting well-being. You can even think of it as fulfillment. It's not just a momentary joy. It's something that lasts, and I'll talk about that a little more. So that's just a little introduction to the topic of happiness, since we're talking about that today. So one of the reasons that I wrote the happiness track was that I attended Yale and Stanford, and I've worked there for many years. And I saw that alongside the brilliance that's there, and I know many Google employees who went to fantastic universities, along with the brilliance and along with the excitement, the innovation, the amazing learning opportunities, also sometimes came misery. And what I mean by that is high levels of stress, of anxiety. In my first year at Stanford as a graduate student, I was pretty giddy, and I was learning from these legends. I mean, the people in the academics, they're legends in their field. And yet, that first year I was there were 3 suicides on the campus. And I was thinking, wow, like we have this amazing opportunity. We're in this place that people dream of coming to. And yet, there's so much despair. And those were, of course, extreme cases. But what I saw was that there was a lot of feelings of stress and anxiety. In one of the classes, a student came up to Carol and said, I have to drop out. It goes against everything I've ever learned. And Carol said, what do you mean? And she said, well, my parents told me I have to be very, very successful. So when I asked them, how do I become very, very successful? They said, you have to work very, very hard. And she said, okay. And then she went back to them and said, how do I know when I'm working hard enough? And they said, when you're suffering. Again, it's an extreme example, but it's one that we actually all buy into a little bit. It's one that we see, and it's one of the reasons we're seeing 50% burnout across industries. It doesn't matter if you work for a nonprofit, if you work for the medical field, we're seeing huge levels, and 50% is on the lower end of what we're seeing across industries. We're seeing that 80% of doctors' visits are due to stress. And we're also seeing that 75% of employees in the US workforce are disengaged. So, and that's not to mention, and we've all heard the impacts of stress.
Well done, boys, there's 4 levels done.
Change to speed 11.
Here we go, let's go. Go, Pete, get up there. Let's go.
16.
Come on, last one, this level. Head up and go. Here we go. Good, Skux. Right. Go, Thorny.
18, 5.
Stay in the middle.
15, 6.
Push.
19, 2.
Go, boy.
Come on, a 6-pack? Who needs a 6-pack? when you got the nose. Or a nose when you got the suit. Now you don't need a suit when you got the moves. Or moves when you got the fire. And who needs all that when you get the door? When you got the dough, the brain, the that's right. Who needs some other thing when you got your thing? Now work on it.
It's the last goodbye, I swear. I have no regrets, for the past is behind me. Tomorrow reminds me just where. Can't quite see the end. How can I rely on my heart if I break it with my own two hands? I heard all you said, don't say anything. It's the last goodbye, I swear.
Wants plug-in vehicles. Look at the sales numbers, they're down 22%. And the #1 selling vehicle is the Nissan Leaf, and their sales are up because Nissan product is selling SUVs.
Right. But the hybrid SUVs, Lauren, were doing really well. What's the turnaround there? Because initially those were the success story when it came to electric vehicles, the hybrid at least, and that's gone.
Right. Have you ever driven a hybrid? It's says
No,
no power.
I actually haven't, so tell me what's wrong with them.
Well, they don't
Well,
make any
I-
noise when they're driving in traffic, which is, as a car girl, Lauren, I have a
Yeah.
problem with the fact that they're so quiet.
I do too. I mean, I drive big performance V8 vehicles, and I have an SUV that's diesel, and I'm a huge diesel fan. But one of the things I have to say is if you're driving a hybrid car, a plug-in car, it's like driving a golf cart. And if you're driving a hybrid, it's fine, but you lose all this towing capacity. And so if you want to take a camper, and camping is up, you've talked about RV sales being up, you know, you can't haul it with that. You're going to need a truck or a crossover or an SUV. And crossovers are awesome because you get the ride of a car and the flexibility of an SUV. Sales are up.
Speaking of electric cars and the electric automaker Tesla, under pressure following that fatality involving its autopilot system. And then on Sunday, Tesla comes out and announces that it delivered 14,370 cars in the second quarter, but that was a decline of 450 deliveries from the first. Elon Musk, the CEO, blaming an extreme ramp up in production. But again, it's another knock on Tesla, Lauren.
Right. You know, it's interesting. He had just, on May 20th, he had just borrowed $2 billion from investors with all these promises that we're going to exceed that 17,000 limit. He didn't even come close to it. And when you're looking at that, why would you borrow that kind of money from investors and then not even meet that goal? And he hasn't met this goal all along, and he's never had a profit in this corporation. I mean, I own a manufacturing company. You can't have a loss and make it up in volume, and that's what he's been trying to do for the longest time. And so eventually this is going to catch up with him, and merging with Solar City is a huge mistake, although it's family, so, you know, I guess he's going to do it to save his cousin.
It smells bad. The whole thing smells bad. Lauren?
I agree. I've never been a fan of Tesla. I think that going against the system may sound great on the surface, but as you look at it down the road, it does not help consumers. I know these people that are, all the Tesla haters are going to email me and tweet and whatever, but I'm going to tell you right now, it sounds great on the surface. It's great when you buy an iPhone and you need to get a new one, you go back to the store. When you got a problem with your Tesla, you have to wait for the 12 Rangers in the country to come to you.
Right.
Or, as I see here in New York State all the time, they put them on a flatbed and send them to a service center. How many people have that many cars that they can say, oh, I'll let my Tesla go in for service while I drive something else, which is why the Chevy Bolt coming out is going to be a pretty good success.
Lauren, this is why we're simpatico, that we're sisters from another mister, because we think the same thing about the same cars. Lauren, thank you. Lauren Fix, the car coach.
Thanks, Daga.
Mothers of black men and women who died in police shootings, such as Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, are speaking at the DNC. So their mothers will be on stage. We're showing you headshots of the speakers right now. Some critics are wondering why Democrats did not invite mothers of slain Dallas police officers to speak as well. Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark is with me. Sheriff, welcome back. Happy to see you as always. Do you see a message or a code that is unhealthy? Or is this a coincidence in the effect that perhaps the DNC felt these issues were covered?
Well, it's not a code. It's a slap in the face to the American police officer. Look, what's going to happen tonight is really compare and contrast that to the RNC convention, Make America Safe Again. The theme tonight with this group that's going to get up and speak is compassion for criminals. Every one of these individuals, nearly every one of these individuals whose mother will speak, was engaged in questionable lifestyle choices. Mike Brown was a criminal who tried to disarm a law enforcement officer. Eric Garner resisted arrest. Freddie Gray resisted arrest. There's two people in here who don't even belong in this group. One of them is Trayvon Martin, who was not killed by police. The other is Sandra Bland, who was not killed by police. She hung herself in a jail cell, tragically. But here's the question I have. Where are the dads? When there are no fathers around to raise a young black boy to develop into a healthy human being, what you end up with, when that father's not there to shape behavior, you end up with a young man who is unmanageable, and he ends up being a misfit that the law enforcement officer has to deal with aggressively, unfortunately. So what we need to do is stop all this nonsense within the black community, take hold of our families, start having more effective parenting, stop with this charade about the police use of force, when in fact underclass behavior is at the forefront of a lot of what's going on in the American ghetto.
Sheriff, I take your point about strong families.
Privilege laws. Now here's the argument. So how do abortion clinic limits actually affect women? Well, almost half the 6.7 million pregnancies each year are unintended, and almost half of those end in abortion. One study concluded that if 31 states outlawed abortion tomorrow, the vast majority of women would still travel to states where it remained legal. However, the impact on women who can't or won't travel could result in a 15% drop in abortions nationally. There's also evidence that diminishing access results in more women resorting to dangerous and illegal means to avert motherhood.
Started doing more publicly. Tell us why you are going from the very private Charles Koch to the new public Charles Koch.
Well, we grew to a size and gained enough notoriety that we had to, because there were all these misconceptions about who we were, what we did, why we did it, that we needed to. And I said, okay, I will do it as promotion of my book last year. And I'm sure all of you have multiple copies and given hundreds to your friends. That's why the sales are so good. But once I agreed to that, and then I had a great interview with Megyn Kelly, and then that kind of said, well, maybe I'll do more if they're all as good as that one.
But you talked about the notoriety. I mean, in political lingo, you were being defined by your opponents.
Isn't that how we're all defined, more or less?
Yeah, so what was wrong with that picture?
I think it'd be an easier answer to answer what was right with it. No, I've said, people say, well, when you read about you in the media, what portion should I believe? That's the question I get. And I'd say, about 10%.
It's that bad?
That bad. But, I mean, it's depends on the publication, of course. Some would be zero, and some would be the majority.
Presumably Fortune would be on the high side, but we won't go there right now.
We would hope so.
So I want to come back to the notoriety and the politics in a little bit, but I want you to talk first about how you run this company, because I think it's very unique. I mean, could you have built, and I should tell the audience if you don't know, Koch Industries, when Charles took over, had about $200 million in revenue. Today it has $115 billion in revenue. It is kind of consistently doubled. I mean, you don't report, so I can't vouch for these numbers, but so we're told anyway. It doubles every 6 years or so. Could you have done that if you were a public company?
Well, maybe somebody could. I couldn't have because I would have been fired because I had these crazy ideas drawing from my interest in the philosophy of science, the scientific method, and in my studies of how people can best live and work together. And so I would say, okay, I'd like to take those ideas on what makes societies more innovative and progressive and productive than others, and let's find out how to use those inside an organization.
Why would that have gotten you fired?
Well, because most of the time it didn't work, because an organization's different than a society, so you just can't like take private property. Okay, every employee owns their property and exchanges. Well, and you have internal markets. Well, that gets too complex. That doesn't work. So you have to think through, or we had to think through what are the benefits, and then how do we duplicate the benefits, but we've got to use a different mechanism. And so we were, like I believe that most innovation comes from trial and error. And it's not just trial and succeed. The error is there for a purpose. Like I say to our people, okay, if you think you're experimenting and you never have any failures, you're not really experimenting. You're not trying anything new. And so we went through quite a period where we had, what I was doing was hurting the company because everybody was confused, kept changing things, and then we finally came up with an approach that really started to pay off.
And can you, we don't have a lot of time here, but can you briefly describe the approach and how it works?
Well, as I say, it's based on the philosophy of science, and we learned to boil it down into a framework of 5 elements. They're called vision, virtue and talents, knowledge processes, decision rights, and incentives. And each one knows a package of dozens of principles, elements, practices. And we find when all those are working together in an integrated, reinforcing way, you really get performance.
So can you give us one example of how that works in practice that's dramatically different from the way most public companies work?
Well, I think one way is that we have found, now it may not be true for any of your companies, but in the experienced people we hire and the companies we acquire, we find that most of them hire first on talent, and then they hope that the values are compatible with their culture. We hire first on values, and we have 10 guiding principles that many companies have principles, but we found also in many companies that some they stick in the drawer, it's a poster on the wall. These principles are who we are as a company. They guide everything we do, including who we hire. That's one. Another is the division of labor by comparative advantage. And what I mean by that is that rather than, okay, you have a vision, you need certain roles filled, and you try to get the best person for each one. We try to optimize every person's role according to what they're good at and they have a passion for. And this is not easy, as you can tell. This takes a lot of work and intensive care. But we find when we get all that right, the right people in the right roles with the right vision and the right values, I mean, then we really have great innovations that improve.
So getting the right people, choosing the team comes first.
That's first.
Now, I've told you, it's my theory that the reason you, after being so incredibly private for 49 years, have started to talk more publicly is because in the competition for talent, you feel like you have to get a positive story out there or people aren't going to want to work for Koch Industries.
No, that's a good part of it, no question. It's usually you have great insight, Alan.
Thank you. Yeah. And is it working? I mean, are you getting, so you had this sort of notoriety that was created by the press, in part because of your political activities. I wonder, by the way, did your political activities in that sense hurt Koch Industries?
It's not measurable. We have a lot of boycotts against us, and then we have a lot of people who write and say, well, we're going to start using all your products. So I don't know what the balance is, but we can't measure it. I would think overall it's positive because...
You never thought we should just shut this down and focus on doing our business?
Shut it down. As I like to say, I'd rather die for something than live for nothing. So there's no alternative for me. This is who I am.
So since we're on this topic, talk a little bit about what you have spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars, probably more than that. You spent a fair amount of your fortune trying to change the political system.
Well, we've spent a considerable amount, but we've raised a lot more
other money as well.
Talk
about what you were trying to achieve with that.
Well, we see, or I should say, I see the country headed toward a two-tiered society, a society increasingly based on control, dependency, and cronyism, which is pitting individuals and groups against each other. And my dream would be to move us toward a society that maximizes peace, mutual respect, and well-being for everybody.
And you've distilled your management technique into what you call market-based management, which has 5 basic components. Let's take a couple of those. You just touched on one. Knowledge, I'm quoting you again, knowledge processes. Not only is it permissible for employees at Coke to challenge their bosses if they think they have a better answer, but they have an obligation to do so.
Absolutely.
Close quote. Now, in practice, I just said in the introduction, Koch Industries is now 9 different freestanding units, 100,000 employees around the world, only a little more than half, 60,000 in this country. How do you diffuse this? I mean, here you could just say, well, this is very high sounding that Mr. Koch, when he was a young man, developed this idea of that we needed challenge culture in our company. Terrific. But now we have a big company, processes apply, the usual bureaucrat. How do you resist that? How do you actually infuse genuine challenge culture across an entity as large as this?
Well, I mean, it starts with values, and that's the 5 dimensions are vision, virtue and talents, knowledge processes, you mentioned, decision rights, and incentives. And they're all based, as you say, from my studies on how people can best live and work together, how societies can organize themselves to maximize well-being for everybody, not just for a select few. And so the starting point is having these values, what we call our 10 guiding principles, having them be who we are as a company. Many companies have lists of principles, but in many cases they put them on the wall and that's the end of it, stick them in the drawer and that's the end of it. Our principles are who we are as a company. They guide everything we do. They determine who we hire, who we retain, who we promote, how you as an employee will be rewarded, everything. And a key part of those values or a key part of those principles is challenge. You've got to challenge, and you've got to be skeptical, and you've got to be committed to getting long-term results. Not just results this quarter, but we evaluate and reward people on long-term results. And I'm not saying it's easy or we're perfect. We're a long way from perfect in any of this, but we fight it every day. But one of the most difficult things we have when we acquire a company is building in this challenge culture, because in so many companies, if you challenge your boss, in particular if you're pushy about it, that can affect your career in a negative way.
Sure.
And we're the opposite. If you never challenge, that's going to affect your career in a negative way. If you challenge, not to prove you're a smarty pants or show up somebody, but because you have an idea on how we can improve, how we can do better, how your boss's decision is a mistake. And if you do that, whether you're right or wrong, you're going to be celebrated and you're going to be rewarded for that, particularly, obviously, if it improves results.
Another of the 5 tenets of market-based management, virtue and talents. And again, I'm quoting from Good Profit. We can hire all the brightest MBAs in the world, and if they don't have the right values, we will fail. We hire based on values first, then talent. That's breathtaking. It's breathtaking Well, first of all, just as a practical matter, how do you screen for values? How do you screen for values legally? You're not allowed to ask questions about people's religion. How do you do that? How do you hire based on values?
We're not concerned about religion. We're concerned about, do you have integrity? Do you have the courage to live by the values when they're tough? This is why Aristotle called courage the most important of all the virtues, because if you don't have it, you won't be able to exercise the other virtues when they're needed most. So courage, compliance, value creation, being dedicated to creating real value for our customers, for society, for the company, knowledge, challenge, treating others with dignity and respect, and then trying to have a job that's fulfilling to you, because we find, and this isn't just altruism, this is the philosophy of mutual benefit. If an employee has a fulfilling job, they're going to be more creative and more productive, and it makes their lives better.
Charles Koch, author of Good Profit. Thank you.
And then we share knowledge internally, and we have, of our top people, top 25, we have something called the Discovery Board. We meet once a month, and every one of the participants, rotating of course, brings up a problem or an opportunity, and the rest of us challenge it. And I love it. I bring up, okay, here's an idea of something we ought to do, and here's how I think we ought to do it. And the last one, I got 6 different attacks. I don't mean just,
they do that?
Oh, that is wrong. Oh, yeah. And
you don't fire them?
I love it. Are you kidding me? Because, I mean, there's people who don't want criticism of their ideas. What are they? Because their ego's too fragile? Well, how about if you implement it and you fail? Talk about a fragile ego. At that point, your career is ruined. So if they can keep me from a disaster, I love it. And then we push those down. All the different groups in the company have something similar. And then we have something called Innovation University, where we put out materials to share innovations throughout the company and the principles of innovation. For example, as I said on experimentation, what we expect if somebody's running an experiment, to design it in a way that if it fails, you learn enough that you're glad you did it. It's like Edison said on inventing the light bulb. It had 3,000 or more failures. And a friend said, gosh, I'm so sorry you had all those failures. He said, I haven't had any failures. I've learned 3,000 things that don't work. And so that's our attitude.
The piece that made, in my opinion, Bill just brilliant is he could absolutely telling you, you are totally screwing up, right? Kick you in the pants, give you a bear hug, and send you off feeling like, okay, I just got beat up. I know I got to improve and step up, but man, he is totally behind me and supportive. And I will tell you, that is really hard to do, really hard to do. And he really spent time to get to know you as a whole person. It wasn't just the role. It was all about the family. He knew, he asked, my husband went through some health challenges, and he sent him a personal email. I mean, it's those kinds of things. He really deeply cared. And he had a way to actually express that.
And you know what you just reminded me of? That, you know, people have reputations as talkers or as listeners. Bill was a talker and a listener.
And Bill ended up coaching the whole company. I don't know if Bill was coaching before that or not. He was just naturally a coach. I think that's the way he led into it. What I want to say about his coaching style is he had a series of standard game plans. How to conduct a one-on-one meeting, how to conduct a staff meeting, how to do a performance review, how to have a board meeting. But what was special about, and he wasn't right about all those things, by the way. Sometimes really wrong about boards. Nonetheless, what he did not have is a standard plan for everyone. And that's what made him different. He really uniquely understood Emil, or me. And so he'd have a custom program for my development and growth as a leader. Above and beyond all these plans and game plans and even custom developments, I think he was obsessed by a set of values and a point of view about culture. And so it wasn't so much that he gave you the answer. In fact, he usually didn't. The most important thing was he understood you. He understood where you were going, and you felt safe, able to be challenged, and stretched.
Yeah, Shelley reminded me of something, relatively trivial when she said that he funded this group. Bill was very generous, and there were wonderful stories at his memorial service and funny stories about the things that he paid for, and that, you'd never bought Bill a drink. I threw my journalistic integrity to the wind a long time ago because with him over beers because I never paid for one. He enjoyed spending his money, I think, that he had made because he didn't have a lot of expensive habits. He had a few, right, obviously.
Yep.
And you had to force him to accept compensation.
Oh.
It was a battle to get him to take equity in Google, he wanted to give back. He wanted to contribute. He really believed he was the luckiest hard-scrabble kid from Homestead, Pennsylvania, who left a losing football record. People always ask, well, why did you go into coaching? He said, you ever look at my football record? This is like 5'4". Then he went to an ad agency. He was working at Kodak. He left an $18 billion Kodak company to go to work at a $90 million Apple company. And it all worked out. It really worked out.
John, Bill loved business, but he didn't necessarily feel that he had to follow everybody else's rules on business. And so, Bill managed conflicts in a different way than other people managed conflicts. And I'd like you to talk about, if you would, the unusual role that he played at Google and Apple and other places, I assume, but that was the most interesting one.
Well, and there's so many people out here who know Bill. I know Bill was on Jim Barksdale's board at Netscape, so if you open this up at all, I want to hear Jim's views about him. But Bill, at the same time, was, I think, the longest-serving board member of Apple, 17 years, and he attended every Google executive staff meeting on Mondays, sitting in the executive staff meetings. And these companies were initially deep partners and then deep rivals, and it drove Steve crazy. He said, choose. And Bill said, if you make me choose, you're not going to like the choice. Besides, I can't even spell HTML. I don't know how to write code. So I'm just helping them be a better company, And to this day, no one has ever questioned his integrity.
Jim, would you nod your head if you want to add something at some point? I'll get you a microphone. If you don't, shake your head, and that's fine. You just blinked. All right, well, let's get Jim a microphone, please, in a second. Brad, can you add? Can you add to that? You had a different perch from Intuit about how Bill juggled all these many business activities that he had.
Well, first of all, no one questioned his integrity. I mean, when you confided in Bill, it stayed with Bill. Bill wouldn't do interviews. He wouldn't talk to anybody else. He didn't want anybody to know when he had given someone a gift. And so that was what you knew you were dealing with. So you had this person of integrity. And then everyone basically knew that even though he may be working with someone that you compete with in the marketplace, your secrets were safe with you, their secrets were safe with them, and he would never divulge those secrets. Now, he had that same point of view about employees and employees who left the company. And there was a period of time, Bill actually evolved, where if you left the company, in some cases you were dead to Bill.
We're out.
And then it got to the point where Bill said, you know what, I'm going to step back and realize, because many of those employees would choose to come back, in which case he celebrated them as alumni and said, I want you to tell your story. Why did you come back? What was the mistake you made, and why are you home again? And so he used it as an opportunity to get other people to understand the grass isn't always greener. But what I always found that helped him navigate that, and it was the story that John just shared, is Steve knew deep down, that Bill wasn't divulging any secrets at Google about what was happening at Apple. Bill would play it off by saying, look, I don't even know how to do that stuff. I'm just over there talking about leadership, and everyone knew that was true.
And it is interesting. I don't know. Do you have a technical background, Shelley?
No.
No. So John's the only one here, I think, with a technical background, and that includes me. Bill was the ultimate non-technical Silicon Valley person, and I think he reveled it. Jim, thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot. Would you like to share anything?
Well, they just handed me a microphone, so I guess I got to do something. No, Bill was a great guy, great friend, and a great mentor to me. When we were starting Netscape, John introduced me to Bill. I assume that's how I met Bill. I love Bill. He later on, after we had been going 3 or 4 years, we needed another board member. I forget why. And so I was quick to ask Bill to join our board. He joined the board, and then the next time I saw him, he says, boy, Steve threw a fit. Because he was on the Apple board at that time. I said, why? He said, Damned if I know. He's just jealous. He wants to keep me and not let you share me. I said, well, tell him we're happy to have you. He said, no, I just told him. But, one little side, like Bill and Homer had their life's mission to visit every baseball stadium in America. I don't know if you all remember.
Oh, yeah. Now, this was Mike Homer, who was your head of marketing at Netscape, a dear friend of Bill's.
And great friend of Bill's, personal friend. And I think it tells sort of the story that once you were Bill's friend, unless you abandoned him, you were a friend for life. He was just that kind of guy. He didn't play different levels of friends or positions, things like that. He was just a wonderful man.
Yes, he was. Thank you for sharing that, Jim.
Can I add a
Please?
point? One of the things that I think Bill did for a lot of CEOs, and especially the first-time CEOs that he started coaching, so like myself, is you come into a role and things are new. You know a lot, but frankly, until you're actually in that seat, there's still a lot of things that you have just not experienced. And Bill was really good about helping to, frankly, shore up the courage. Right? It's a little bit more than confidence. To be a really good CEO, you have to have a lot of courage because you make a lot of decisions with not enough or as much information as you want. And it's all about the courage, right, to take that step or make that call. And he was good about being able to do that without telling you what to do. I mean, it was rare that he actually told you what to do. Yep. He asked you the questions, he made you think about it, right, all those things. But the courage piece was really important. I remember I was hired by Vinod Khosla. Vinod Khosla is a very strong personality. Kleiner Perkins, right, was the company, was with Kleiner at the time.
He'd laugh at you for calling Vinod a strong personality. Go on,
I don't know how to describe that.
Cut the crap.
You're right. Okay.
What do you really think?
But this is being taped. And
broadcast.
So one of the big challenges is you were good with Vinod as long as you agreed with Vinod. Right? If you didn't agree with Vinod, then there was a problem and there was a challenge. And we had a point where, frankly, Vinod really felt I should go here, and I was going here. It wasn't even close. It was here and here. And I had the conversation with Bill, and I said, here's what I'm going to do. And frankly, having the courage from him, I came home, told my husband, listen, tomorrow I may no longer have a job because I'm going to go tell Vinod that I'm doing this, and he wants me to do this. But having someone like Bill, frankly, that you can talk through, get it, really helped with that courage point to be able to go and take those steps. And the good news is I ended up being the longest serving CEO under Vinod. He tended to churn through CEOs because I held my ground.
Please, Brett.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wanted to pick up on this because courage has now come up from everybody. Bill loved people that basically, he said, had dirt under their fingernails, get shit done kind of people. He did not care what school you went to. He did not care whether or not someone thought they had the highest IQ or not. He cared about people who got stuff done. And that validated a lot of people. He came from a small town, Homestead, PA. He cared about that sort of hard scrabble upbringing, and he made other people feel like they were capable of doing stuff. He and I were sitting around one day, and we were talking about a speech I'd heard, and I could tell this was towards the last few months, and we were over at his house on the couch, talking about the Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and those wildebeests that run up to the river, and there's crocodiles in the river, and they got to make it across, and you see they're kind of stampering, and eventually one jumps. And then they all jump, and they try to get over, and one or two get taken out, but 98% of them get across. And Bill looked at me and said, God made a very special wildebeest when he made that first wildebeest. And those are the kinds of people that Bill loved. The courage to lean into the things that were uncertain, be okay with failure, be okay with success, but just give it a shot and lead people to the next opportunity. And that's the kind of stuff Bill was made of.
John, do you have any, as I said when we started, Bill was very prickly about, he didn't like talking to the press. He made it clear to me many times that he didn't like reporters and he didn't view me as one when we were drinking. But why, he genuinely did not care about getting attention, and he didn't want to tell his story. Do you have any sense why?
He worked with a lot of star celebrity CEOs.
Yes.
But I don't think he liked ego. He believed in team. And he lived the kinds of values that he shared. I don't think you can be an effective coach and be on stage. You got to be off stage. Maybe calling the plays, maybe whispering from the side. And so it's his values, who he is, how he did his work. He didn't want to be compensated. He didn't want to get the credit. He wanted the relationships. He wanted to make a difference. He wanted to contribute. He wanted to give back.
Yeah, I think the give back piece is key. And I think one of the other pieces was, frankly, he didn't want to take anyone's shine away. You know, so part of being a coach and helping, as John said, you have all the stars. But if it was suddenly, this is a Bill Campbell CEO, this is a Bill Campbell CEO, it's a Bill Campbell, well, that might actually diminish. And I don't think he ever wanted in any way to diminish what people have accomplished.
And he verbalized that to me.
Yeah.
He said, if I'm telling the story.
Right.
Quickly, Brad.
I was just going to say, and he gave without any expectation or desire to get. And the most recent example was a group that he used to get together with that were with him at Apple and at Next and other places. And Caroline Donohue's in the audience. They got together after his passing, like they always did at the Old Pro, the sports bar that he was a part owner of. And they were telling stories and reminiscing. And at the very end, they were ready to pay the tab. And they came up and said, no, the tab's been covered by Bill. And it'll continue to be covered by Bill.
Oh, wow.
And so he's still giving.
Unbelievable. So I didn't want this to be maudlin, but Bill was very fond of his communities, and he had many of them. Columbia was one of his communities. I didn't know until his memorial service that he was very involved in his church, the Catholic Church, but he was, and that's because we never talked about religion. We talked about many, many, many things, and never that. And he also cared about Silicon Valley, and so the reason I wanted to do this is that we care very much about our community at Fortune Brainstorm Tech, and it's a very fitting way for us to end our conference and for me to thank the four of you. Thank you for being here.
Was seen by many as a massive gamble.
I don't think the Rugby Football Union especially quite knew what they'd kind of employed in a way, because they knew me as a rugby player. They knew me as a rugby coach. I had clear ideas when I came in that this was going to be run just like I run my business.
What Clive did when he came in was literally just shake it all up and say, right, okay, if that's what we did before, we're going to do something different this time. Let's do something that's exciting, challenging people.
He wanted people to turn up to England training and turn up to an England environment and be blown away. And for the national team to be on a different level, to be on another planet from your everyday life.
Made it somewhere that once you left and the euphoria died down and you went back to, to your day in, day out job of playing at clubs, you kind of just couldn't bear the thought of not being there next time.
Just moving the whole of the England setup into the full-time professional environment, and with no excuses. If we're going to be the best in the world, we have to be the best at everything, on the pitch and off the pitch. And to do that, they had to change their whole lifestyle.
From day one, Woodward broke with convention. The buzzwords were ideas, ambition, and the most daunting of all, change.
Some people were very scared of change, and I don't think Clive is at all. If anything, he welcomes change, that it can put a different perspective on stuff. You look at it a different way.
There's lots of new ideas, and some of them are very, very good and survived to this day. Some of them were okay and lived a little bit, and some were very strange and didn't last long at all. But I think with Clive, he's never afraid to try something very different.
Something I've been very keen to do is to move away from the image of rugby union being, pints of beer with the lads down the pub after the game. That is not the image of the game. It's, to me, the image of rugby union now should be the most professional sport in the world.
Under fitness coach Dave Reddin, Woodward pushed the players harder than they had ever been pushed before.
One or two of them, the players I define now as energy sappers, would be sort of laughing about it and telling all their mates who weren't playing anymore. There was a lot of kind of ridicule, and it wasn't easy.
Yeah, he had some hair, I think. He had some hair and wore specs, didn't he? He looked like Herr Flick.
There were no excuses. So if you couldn't go out and perform, you were not capable of being in that England jersey. And I think he found out a few players that couldn't perform at that sort of level, and got rid of them.
We're working in brutal business here. We're not here to come second and in a cosy environment. It's not. And we can't have energy sappers. And your job as a manager or coach is to switch them over from becoming an energy sapper to an energizer. And you've got to do everything humanly possible, but there comes a stage, if you can't switch him, he's got to go.
By the time they boarded the plane for Australia, there was no fitter team in the world. It was vindication of Woodward's single-minded pursuit of excellence.
You're in this situation, you've got yourself there through damn hard work and all this preparation, and you've now got the opportunity to do it, and you're never ever going to have a second chance at it.
We were a team that were really on the up going into the World Cup. Clive Woodward, I think, set out to get his England team the best prepared England team ever to arrive at a World Cup.
I've never coached defence in my life. I don't think I'd probably ever been taught to tackle in my life as a player. Certainly no, we'd never spoken when I played for England about defence. And what you have in American football is 6 defensive coaches, 6 attacking coaches or offensive coaches, 1 head coach. So you've got a coaching team of 13 people. It was then a case of going to the RFU and fighting like hell for budgets and bringing people on.
Woodward's first key appointment was a defensive coach. He poached Phil Larder from Rugby League, who was instrumental in creating the meanest defence in world rugby.
You normally got a forwards coach and a backs coach with England, and he's walked in, he's gone, right, no, I want a defensive coach, I want a kicking coach, a throwing coach, like for the hookers, I want a scrummaging coach.
The biggest thing on the coaching side was getting the best coaches, which I think we eventually got, you know, especially Andy Robinson, Phil Larder, Dave Alwood. These are superstar people in terms of the coaching world. Making sure we gave them everything so they can deliver.
2 years into Woodward's regime, the New England were put to the test in the 1999 World Cup and failed.
We were still nowhere near going into these games against the bad guys, thinking we can win them. We were still way behind. If we'd won the World Cup, which you could have done, we had the kind of the talent, but it would have been against all logic and all common sense. We'd have done it in the good old English way of, you know, coming as underdogs, and that's not me.
They went out in the quarter-finals to none other than the South Africans.
We all want to win, but you do not want to win against the odds. You want to win because you know why you've won.
The backlash was instant. Many claimed the Woodward experiment had failed. Some called for him to be sacked.
There was a lot of hysteria afterwards, a lot of people saying it's time for change, despite the fact it had been there less than 2 years. Fortunately, the people who knew what I was doing said, no, it's not time for change. You know, we're only still scratching the surface at what we're trying to do here.
The RFU held firm and gave him 4 more years to turn it round. That winter, Woodward completed his dream team of coaching staff by signing up Andy Robinson as his number 2, a man he believed to be one of the outstanding coaches in world rugby. Blessed with an exceptional crop of English players, Woodward and Robinson's teams began to dominate the game. Most critically, they were exorcising the hex of the Southern Hemisphere teams, running up 10 consecutive wins against them. In 2003, they won the Grand Slam. It's further proof of Woodward's relentless search for anything that might give the team an edge.
I use the term critical non-essentials. You know, you don't win a test match because you've got better clothes than the All Blacks. Or you don't win a test match because you arrive in a bus with a big England rose on. But when you add up all these hundreds of things, I think that's why you do win.
Often it was flying in the face of a lot of criticism as well from external people. Well, why are you spending this amount of, you know, why do you have to stay in the best hotels? You know, why do you have to travel first class everywhere?
You know, we had all the players with laptop computers and all this, and, you know, some of the people here were saying, well, why is he not giving them more raw meat?
In the pursuit of excellence everywhere, England's backroom staff expanded to embrace experts for aspects of the game no one else had even thought of.
We've brought this lady in 6 months before the World Cup called Cheryl Calder, who's an eye coach, which in simple terms, it's your weight training your eyes. The eyes are probably the most important muscle in your body when you're playing sport. So you've got to train them. So you're laughing like most people laughed when I first spoke to people here about it. Oh, he's mad again, what's he on about?
Woodward's army of specialists was ridiculed and envied in equal measure. As well as an eye coach, there was a video analyst, a medical team of 4, a nutritionist, a chef, and even their own QC.
I think the most important thing that we've got to do is...
Woodward revels in their expertise. The rugby Svengali, more often than not, taking a back seat and letting them do the talking.
Win this battle here, that we could score a lot of points. But if we lose a little bit of concentration, if we stop working, if the guy on the inside is lazy.
The team has a code word for everything from lineouts to wild card plays. In the heat of a game, one word communicates a whole strategy to the entire team.